So what do we refer to petroleum as? Kerosene is the first use of petroleum. So what do we normally call it? Oil or crude oil. And all fossil fuels are considered what types of fuels? Non-renewable chemical fuels. Okay, good. Who holds the most of it? Middle East, really Saudi Arabia actually has 1/5 of our oil's reserves of what we call conventional oil reserves, which is what I'm going to talk about today. And oil is a major source of energy for the world. 40% of energy used in the US comes from petroleum. So the majority of our, well, not 1/4 of it anyway, of our energy use, more than a fourth, 40%, almost half comes from petroleum. Just like we drill or undersea mine for natural gas, we do the same for petroleum. And the formation is the same. Remember this slide in natural gas? So 300 million years ago, we had tiny plants and animals in oceans, and they were buried under heat and pressure, and they fossilized into what's called petroleum or conventional crude oil. So we mine through undersea mining, and when we drill, we go down, and oil basically pours out. Once it stops, pressure is added for it to keep on going until that dries out and there's none left. So when crude oil pours out of the well or leaks out, what does it look like? A liquid. What kind of liquid? Black. What else? Sludgy, gooey. Yes. It's thick liquid, okay? It's not like, diluted. It's very thick. What's it made up of? A lot of methane, carbon compounds, let's say, or hydrocarbons, because methane's one of them, nitrous compounds or nitrogen compounds and sulfur compounds. So your organic compounds, remember they're fossil fuels. They're remains of organisms, CHON PS, they're going to have all that. Once we mine it, it's got to get transported by what? Pipes. Tell me what effects you think this has on the environment. Habitat fragmentation, that's great. You're building pipelines across lands where animals can actually live on, and they're going to be divided, or even migration patterns can be affected. Good. And what about biomes? Do you remember this when we talked about biomes? What biomes are affected by petroleum mining? The tundra. Fragile biome, and these pipelines cause the biome to have a really hard time in regenerating because there's very little decomposition. And then in addition, what do you see there in most of these pictures? What type of biome? Forest. Forest is actually the biggest target now because a lot of the oil that we are now mining for requires the removal of forest. So this is what happens once we mine the petroleum. We transport it through these pipes into a production plant where it's refined. What happens during the refinery? Look at the heat and pressure, and what else is happening? So it's heated in a boiler, and then it's what? Distilled. Good. And then it's going to be, take two. So when it's refined, it's heated and distilled, and it makes different products based on, what do you think? Nope, usage will be based on the product's what? Like what? Nope. What physical property? So that would be chemical, would be how many carbons. What physical property are we looking for? It's what? Of what? No, how what? Nope. What do we want in a fossil fuel? For it to do what? Be efficient. So it has to have a lot of what? Energy. So it has to have, it's based on boiling points. So its ability to heat, or what kind of a heating capacity it has. You do not have to know this breakdown, okay? I'm going to give you a breakdown of petroleum, fuels versus non-fuels, and that's what they're refined into. The ones you're going to have to know a little bit more about is the petroleum fuel breakdown, okay? Because what's petroleum's main use, according to what we already learned? What's gas? We can't say the word gas anymore, right? We say what? Transportation. So it's for fuels for transportation. That's petroleum's main use. Second, industry. Okay, so I'm going to give you the products that are made to fuel cars, planes, boats, and then I'm going to give you the products that are made in the industry. Now, who did we say holds most of the world's oil reserves? Saudi Arabia. But now, besides them, look at all the different people and the conventional oil reserves. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq. This quote, this scary thought quote, actually comes from your textbook. That according to the 2005 report by the Institute, whatever, almost 1/4 of the world's conventional oil is controlled by states that sponsor or condone. Just read the names. Yes. Terrorism. And this is a quote from your textbook. Now, Middle East, Russia and Venezuela also have high quantities of conventional oil. Venezuela is one of our biggest contributors to United States, so is Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. But when I first started to redo the notes, and I'm going to go back here to show you this really quick, I looked at this chart, and now look at this chart and what's happening. What do you see here? Who's winning? US. How's that possible if I just told you that they have? So what do you think is the blank here? Based on what we talked about before. Huh? Accessibility is definitely one of the key words. When we're talking about oil that's not easily accessible, what do we reference it as? Tar is one example. But we called oil that's easily accessible, that has its known reserves, we call it conventional oil. So it's unconventional. So now, because of this new exploration of unconventional oil, the United States, to be exact, has shale oil, and they are now one of the biggest reserve holders and producers of petroleum, which shale oil is a type of petroleum. So these were my notes 10 years ago. I had this exact graph, okay? And obviously, 10 years ago, we did not have anything that we have now, or did we think we would? Actually, I'm sure there was a lot of people that thought we would. So that orange is what's considered the unconventional oil reserves. They were under the impression that we would be able to tap into these reserves and increase our reserves by over 50%. They did it. And at first I thought, are they crazy? Because how much money is this going to cost? And what are they going to do to lands? I mean, the types of lands that they were going to tap into. But based on this, when you look at this, they obviously had a good reason to do it. And if you look back at 4 years ago, what gas prices were, you didn't see the effects of it because you weren't driving. But to fill up my tank was $120. Now it's $60. Half of what it cost. That happened in 4 years, I promise you, because of this. So how do we get this? And what are these? The first kind of substitute, call it, is oil sand, which they call tar sand. And you don't have to fill in any notes here, but you want to know that it's a mixture of clay, sand, and water, and you have to know that compound, bitumen, linked to oil sand. You have to. This is actually still now a conventional oil. So they went from exploring and drilling, and they found a way to tap into it, a conventional way. So it's considered conventional oil. And this is how Canada is up there now on that pie chart, because they have a lot of this. We have this, and I'll go back to the fracking slide. We have oil shales, and we talked about this when we did natural gas. You have to know, again, all of these are hydrocarbons. You have to know kerogen is linked to oil shales. So if you want to underline those words as I'm saying, they're going to remove excess sulfur and nitrogen. Now, these are solid rocks that have these hydrocarbons kind of embedded in them. So it takes a lot of water to tap into this. And this is what takes place. You don't have to know the whole fracking process, but you have to know that we drill deeper than we do for regular conventional petroleum. We go way deeper. We throw tons of water down, hit these rocks so that the rock breaks up and releases this oil or natural gas because they're found together. And then we tap into it by applying pressure and it rises up. So there's a little process there, and we talked about it with natural gas. But if I'm throwing down tons of water to apply pressure to break up rock, what else am I breaking up? What? Which is what? Land. So you're literally cracking land in order to get this. So you have to say to yourself, how did we get to this point? Well, we were dependent on a country that we're at war with for petroleum. It was you crack the land or stick to that. I think the cracking of the land won. Obviously it did. So that's the reason. And I will stop there.